Good afternoon. This is the Torah and Parashat Lech Lecha. It's the third Parsha in Sefer Bereshit, and it's starting a new era. The first two Parshas covered the first 10 generations of Noach, and then Noach, the second Parsha, Noach to the birth of Avram. Now, this Parsha is the beginning of the building and construction of the Jewish people and bring a whole new reality to the world. And there are two Mishnahs in Pirkei Avos, the wisdom of the fathers, that discusses this. So put it in context, I'd like to be the second Mishnah for that. Asher Doros Ma'an Ad Noach, Hudia Kamerek Mayan Lefanav, Shekol Hadoros Hayu Maksin and Bilba Shabi Elehem et Mei Mabu. There were 10 generations from Adam to Noach. They showed a degree of his patience for all these generations, increasingly and angered him increasingly till he brought upon them the waters of the flood. Then the next pasuk, the next mission is Asher Doros min Noach ad Avraham Hodia Kama Areka Bayim Lefanav Shekol Doros Hayu Makos Bain. Now you would think in the same translation there were 10 generations from Noach to Adam to show the degree of his patience for all these generations, angered him increasingly until our forefather Avraham came and received the reward of them all. And that's through spiritual knowledge brought down to the Jewish people since then. Now, Asra in this next mission, Dalit, Asra Nisayonot, the Nisa, Avraham, Avinu, Va'ama Mekulam, Hodia Kama Hibaso, Shel Avraham Avinu. Our forefather Yitzhak was tested with 10, Avraham, was tested with 10 trials. He was sure withstood them all to show the degree forefathers Abraham's love of God. Now, one of the main themes running through these 10 the two parshas this week's and next week's is those tests. Now, those tests are also augmenting something new, because the generations had sunk to the generation of Migdal Babel, the Tower of Babel, it's called in English, where all the people were concerned about building this huge tower and battling with God, heaven, whatever they meant by that. And Hashem separated them into 70 languages. Until then, they'd all spoken Hebrew. Then now it's interesting. At this time, both Noach and Abraham were alive at the same time towards the end of Noach's life. Now, Noah could have assisted Abraham. They could have both done outreach kiruv to try to bring the nations of the world to a high level. However, they failed to do so. And it was all left to Avram. He was not yet Abraham, and his wife was Sarai, not Sarah, which I'll explain in more detail shortly. Now, these 10 tests, all the things that were gained from that, not only was to elevate Abraham, but was passed on spiritually, genetically to our Yitzhak and Yaakov, by extension to us. Now, these 10 tests of Abraham, interestingly enough, are related to the 10 sayings with which Hashem created the world, except in reverse order. In other words, the 10th saying of which Hashem created the world was, let us make men and women. Now, this is equivalent to the first test of Abraham. Now, there's different lists with different bases, but the one I'm dealing with here is Before Lech Lecha, there were two tests that Abraham had. From age 3 to age 14, his father had to hide him from King Nimrod, who had been told by his astrologers, so-called holy men, that there was a child who was going to arise. According to certain midrashic sources, it wasn't just it wasn't the boys like Pharaoh's astrologers told, but it was both boys and girls. We wiped out a whole uh, girls and the boys for a certain period of time. Now Avram was, but the astrologers still say that the boy was alive. Avram at that point came to a belief in one God, and because his father was a high-level official of Nimrod, he managed to hide him from 13, 14, when it was finally safe for him to come out. The second test was in the furnace or Dean, where Avram's father turned him into Nimrod for as being against belief in idols. A furnace was built around Avram for 3 days, and Hashem miraculously saved him. Now, and then the third test was Lech Lecha, to leave his family, his land, his people, all of the things that make a person as part of something bigger. Hashem asked him to leave, and he was tested a number more times, another 7. Now, why are these these 10 tests in reverse order? Because when the human race, as I said, had sunk to such a low level, Hashem had realized that the entire world, the entire population cannot bring Hashem cannot bring the world to the ultimate place Hashem wanted. So Hashem had to choose one people. The term chosen people was to serve in God's mission, not that we're above anybody or anything like that. Now, therefore, if you look at it, this was what was going on. Now, there is a further question here of, let's look at the seventh test, the last test here, eighth test, which was equivalent to let there be light, be he, or in other words, the purpose of creation was to bring goodness in the world, which was represented by light, or it's a spiritual light we're talking about when we'll see it as Zman Mashiach. Now, we see this, he, or that's equivalent to the mitzvah of bris milah, circumcising the foreskin of a baby boy when he's 8 days old. And it was only at that point that, first of all, in the creation of the universe, that there was light, for Hashem's purpose of creating the universe. The first 2 causes were general explanations, but the first specific act elevating the universe started with the Hior, which was the third of the creative sayings. And that's where there was a distinction between good and evil. And we see that with the test of bris milah, that because Abraham was not sure, because it was going to raise him, people's house to such a spiritual level, he wasn't sure how he'd relate to the rest of humanity. He was trying to bring to a belief in one God. In any event, he accepted Hashem's command. Now, until that time, he was called Avram, and his wife was called Sarai. Now, the explanation on a simple level that's given is that if they, as Avram and Sarai, cannot have children, that's why Abraham had been asking for signs that he would have a descendant, child, and only Abraham and Sarah could have a child. Now, and they did go on to have Yitzhak. Now, question that's brought here is, so what's the name change? What's the significance of it? Yes, it added a letter. There's many explanations of the significance of that, but there's something far more fundamental going on. Derek Ateva, Derek the Mazlot, the signs in the stars, the world of nature. Avram and Sarai cannot have children. It was only as Abraham and Sarah they could. And what does that mean on a deeper level? And just raise another question. Are we, in fact, the Jewish people, descendants of Adam and Chava, and more specifically the son Seth in English, and Rav Yitzchak Isaac, who was a Talmud of the Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, Rav Eliyahu Vilna, said, in fact, that it depends. Spiritually, we are descendants of Adam and Chava, Neshama-wise, but physically, we are not, because we were a brand new creation. Because Avram initially was not able to father children, neither was Sarai. There was miracles needed in both their cases to allow them to have children. And therefore, we are not of the Torah. We are not of that type of thing, of world. In other words, the Jewish people are malam in the Teva, against the natural order of things above it. And that applied throughout our history. We've survived challenges from so many oppressors, yet we managed to survive. And we prosper in different countries. Now we're coming back to Israel. Last week's Parsha discussed the reasons why we're prospering now. And any event because of that, we've always been protected. We see that when we get to the Parashat Shmos, Sefer Shmos, the 10 plagues, and the death of the firstborn, which was totally against anything in natural order. That rule applies even today, and we can see that, for example, in the open miracles we experienced since October 7, 2023, where we managed to overcome multiple enemies with all kinds of technological systems and missiles. I'm going to catalog the whole thing now. We're all aware of it. Now, just to give one example, something like 29,000 missiles were sent to try to destroy us. And there were different estimates of how many chas v'shalom, God forbid, tens of thousands of people would have been killed if most of those rockets landed. Yet, there's a 95% success rate at intercepting the missiles, and even those who got through, there was minimum deaths and damage. And to show you the great level of this miracle, if it needs an extra any proof, the same system was supplied to the Ukrainians, and there was only a successful rate of 50% interception of the missiles. As I said, even those missiles that landed, there's minimum injuries and deaths and minimum damage. In light of all things, truly miraculous. And there was many stories of miracles, both on October 7th, subsequently, and with the Chayalim in fighting in Gaza and Syria and Lebanon. and against Iran. And also the miraculous freeing of the hostages recently, which will hopefully lead to peace and expansion of the Abraham Accords. In any event, all this is going against history, something that Mark Twain pointed out. What's the secret of the Jewish people? That they could survive all this by building empires. And that answer is, we, in fact, it's with Hashem's gratitude, help, which we should be grateful. And now in this parsha and subsequent parshas, we're going on the spiritual journey that made all of that possible. I'd like to wish everybody a good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.